Hey ecofictologists, lovely to see you again. You're about to see a shortened highlight reel of my interview with Francesca Trotman from Love the Oceans. She was such a wonderful guest and she had so much to say about her conservation work that we ended up having quite a long conversation. If you are interested in hearing more about her research and the work she does in conservation in Mozambique, and also about the local villagers that she works with there, follow the link up here or also at the end of this video to see the interview in full and unedited. Either way, enjoy. So yes, let's just start the interview. So hey ecofictologists, welcome back to the channel. This week we're doing something a little different and very exciting. We've got a guest on our channel. This is Francesca Trotman. I'm going to call her Chess because that's how I met her. Mozambique kind of took a hold of you, didn't it? Because now you're based there, and Chess has founded her own marine conservation organization called Love the Oceans. So of course, my first question is just to hand it over to you and just tell us a bit about yourself and Love the Oceans and how it all started.
Basically, yeah, Love the Oceans is a marine conservation organization, and I started it because I first came to Mozambique in 2013, 7 years ago. What? Well, I fell in love with the country then, or maybe more the marine life, because I didn't spend that much time in the community. But I also saw my first shark killing, so humans killing sharks. And at the time I was at university studying marine biology, and sharks had been my passion from a very young age, which is why I went into marine bio. Returned to Mozambique and spent, I think it was about 4 months with the shark fishermen there. And yeah, so basically I wanted to work out how bad the shark fin trade was, because although it was upsetting seeing the actual sharks killed in 2013 when I first saw it, I realized that on a small scale, yes, that's upsetting individually, but if that's happening on a much larger scale, that's pretty detrimental to the local marine ecosystem. Got the exact results you would think in terms of sustainability with the shark fin trade. So it's unsustainable and potential cascade effect through the marine food web and detrimental effects for the food security in the area, because this coastal community relies on fish as a protein source. So I initially founded Love the Oceans to continue my master's data collection and continue the fisheries research. It needed to be a multi-pronged approach. The government here aren't just going to stop shark finning, because a lot of money comes from that. So you've got to provide financial incentives to stop it. You've got to provide multiple reasons to stop it and proof, like aka science, that it's going to have a really bad effect on the environment. The way that we work is we kind of like identify a barrier that can stand in someone's way of living a more sustainable life, and then working to erase that barrier.
The inspiration for me asking you to do this interview was that I saw you on Instagram that you recently had a chat with Photographers Without Borders. Is that right? And they had a segment on storytelling in conservation. So can you tell us a bit about the conversation that you had with them?
Yeah, so they're actually one of our partners. We came into contact with them initially in 2016. Basically, Danielle founded the organization because there's a massive gap between like NGO work and creating media, because an NGO can't spend loads of money on employing a really great photographer or videographer, but they need that collateral to be able to show people what they're doing and be able to say like, this is why we need this money, but they can't get money to start with. So there's this like spiral of like just a disconnect between it. So she started the organization initially to send photographers overseas and videographers overseas and create media for different organizations. Yeah, so she asked me to be on the Storytelling for Change series that they're running, and they've had some ridiculously awesome people on there. They had like Christina Matamaya and a bunch of different people all running different workshops around different subjects. So obviously mine was around like marine conservation and how storytelling comes into play there. So it was a lot of like conversations around how important media is essentially to creating change, and how pictures are lovely, but if there's a story behind them, it becomes a lot more meaningful. It's quite complex, but storytelling is like absolutely integral to that. So that's our connections with Photographers Without Borders. They're really, really cool.
I've been talking about the effect that ecofiction could have on people in like a theoretical sense, because this is how I imagine it would happen and how I think it could work. And like you said, all the stories that you're telling are non-fiction. Like you're telling the stories of real people and real events in a real place and everything. And there is a difference in the connection that you get between a non-fiction story and a fictional story. But do you think there's a place for fiction in this kind of space?
Yeah, definitely. I think that fiction is really important in inspiring and capturing people, so that your fiction often you can emotionally invest in a lot more. So there's definitely something to be said for ecofiction, because especially for youngsters, getting them invested from a young age, and sometimes they might read a book or whatever not thinking about the eco side of it, and it could be an ecofiction book but they haven't even really paid attention to the fact that it's an ecofiction book, but they're getting subliminal messaging like the entire way through, and then the kind of moral of the story is look after the environment. And like a lot of like the Dr. Seuss books, like the Lorax and stuff like that, is such like, I love it. I'm 27 and I love that. But like books like that, yes, they're ecofiction obviously, but they can inspire a generation, and that's what a lot of Dr. Seuss's books did, to be honest. So there is definitely something to be said for that.
Yeah. Do you think that like fiction about conservation and such would be more powerful if geared towards a younger audience rather than an adult audience? Or do you think it'll reach people no matter what?
It depends what type of fiction you're talking about. I think Dr. Seuss speaks to all generations, like love those. But I think there's definitely a young audience to be captured by ecofiction. I've got one of my close friends wrote a book, ecofiction book about the plastic bag, and I think it's for like 4-year-olds. So it's definitely a young audience, but it really gets them thinking about like changing their plastic consumption habits. So, but I think there's definitely a area for it. Obviously, if it's clear that it's fiction and all the rest of it, and people don't read it thinking that it's non-fiction. But providing all of that, I think there's definitely room for ecofiction for adults. I think there's definitely room for that.
And on my channel, I've spoken about kind of this the need for a bit more hope. And do you find that in the stories that you tell, whether they're so that even the non-fiction stories, that the success stories, do they reach people more? Do they get more of a response than kind of the stories about the decline and everything that we're losing?
Yeah, I think the hope aspect is like really crucial to storytelling, because otherwise you just bum people out, and to be honest, they usually tune off your channel if it's just like constant negativity. And I think the world's kind of historically been quite oversaturated with like negative guilt tripping, and like, you know, look how horrible this is, you have to give money to help it. I don't think that kind of like shock media works as well anymore. Shock media, yes, okay, it does work sometimes, but the world, there's a lot of horrible stuff going on, and I think that we have become desensitized to that. So hope media is can be a lot more effective, or at least we found. So for everything that we post, even if it's negative news, we still try to give an action. So it's like, this is what the problem is, this is what we're doing about it, this is what you can do about it, and giving people that action to be able to do something is really important, as part of like providing that hope. You can't just be, the world is ending, goodbye. It's got to be like, the world could potentially end, but let's take this action to make sure that it doesn't.
Do you think, kind of in your field of conservation, do you think there are stories that aren't being told that should be told?
Yeah, I mean, there's like millions of stories that are completely untold. To be honest, I don't think the mainstream media features anywhere near enough environmental stories, whether that be success stories as well, because as we said, like, negative stories don't always work. And I think, to be honest, like, sometimes the media is really irresponsible and won't report like the full story on something. Humans are usually the environmental problem, so they have to be involved in the solution. So unless you're going to do some kind of educational outreach as well, then that problem's not going to suddenly stop. Like, the exploitation of the oceans isn't just going to halt. You've got to involve humans in that too. So I think, like, the rhetoric, there's a lot of like blame placing around like the shark fin trade. And if you look through the supply chain, the shark fins here are shipped off to Hong Kong, but the guys here are getting paid like a tiny amount for it. They're not doing it because they want to kill sharks. They're doing it because it's a means to an end to feed their family. If you can provide an alternate source of income that isn't exploitive of the ocean, and you can provide the education around why shark fishing is bad, then more often than not, people are going to switch to the sustainable income, because they know that they're making sure that their future generations are going to be able to eat from the sea as well. So I think that there needs to be more responsibility around encompassing the whole story and making sure that there isn't just blame placing, because I think it's not necessarily very constructive just being like, these people are consuming it, this is really bad, it's their fault. It needs to be a whole, looking at the whole story. With our work, we could share photos of dead sharks, dead whales, dead manta rays, whatever. We could share that online. But what is coming out of that, all that's happening, is people are getting really angry at the fishermen. They are getting angry at Mozambique. You potentially will have people opting out of Mozambique because of it, which is working directly against what we want to do, because we want to encourage tourism so that there is that alternate source of income. So yeah, responsibility around media telling is really important.
Do you think there's a role for fiction in bridging that gap, that telling the stories properly from a different perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I think if we normalized through fiction, if we normalized telling stories from different backgrounds and different angles within conservation, but also within loads of different areas, if we could normalize, so like, it wasn't unusual to find a book that told the story from the shark fisherman's perspective. I don't know of any fiction books that do that, but if it became more normal, then people would potentially join those dots a lot easier together, and it would become less of a them and us situation. It would become a, okay, we understand each other's point of view. And a lot of the time with environmental problems, when you're working with humans, it's a lack of understanding of people's points of view. Like, when we first started, it was a lot, and it still is, a lot of conversations around like culture and around like what's appropriate and why people are doing what they're doing, and having conversations around, yeah, like why the shark fin trade is going on, and understanding each other's point of view is really important to make conservation long lasting. So if we could normalize through fiction, so that growing up and as an adult, you have access to a media base that normalizes telling stories from completely different, and you don't necessarily have a hero of the story. Like, the classic story that I would expect to find, if there is one out there of fiction around shark fishing, would be like someone stopping the shark fishing, and then that person would be the hero in the story, right? But there is a whole story around why the shark fishermen are fishing in the first place. If it was more normal to tell that story, then I think that people would understand each other's perspectives a lot more.
So you said that you don't really have a lot of time to read, and you've already mentioned the Lorax as being one of your favorite eco-fiction books. But do you in your lifetime of reading, do you remember reading a book that kind of made you feel kind of awe for nature, or made you feel a bit more connected?
Yeah, I mean, it was more connecting me to like the environmental problems and changing my perspective of like what could happen in the future. Definitely one of the more adult books that I'd read when I was a kid. I still must have been like, 11 or 12 at the time. And it was about basically how we'd screwed the planet really, really bad. And we had to find another planet to live on. Started on planet Earth, and then we moved on to a spaceship, and we had to go and find another planet. And it was more about that, like, apocalyptic end of the world situation, where we just run out of resources, and what that meant and what a new planet looked like, and all of that kind of stuff. So that was the one that kind of got me thinking more about what we're doing to the planet, but also what our future could look like if we don't change things. So that was, yeah, probably my first step into like more adult ecofiction, because it was, yeah, more, yes, it was apocalyptic-y, but it was also quite educational in terms of getting you to think about what your future could look like if environmental actions aren't taken.
Well, that is pretty much, those are my questions for you. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Just learning, using books to learn is like such an important tool. So whether that be fiction or non-fiction, it's such a useful resource. So yeah, everyone gets stuck into books, read as much as you can.
Everyone gets stuck into books. That's right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Chess, and appearing on Ecofictology. As for the people watching, if you have any questions for Chess, you can either pop them down in the comments below and I will get them to Chess, or she will see them on the channel and I'm sure she will answer them. Or you can find her and Love the Oceans on Twitter and on Instagram, pretty much at Love the Oceans, right? Is that the easiest way people can get in contact with you?
Yeah, our website's lovetheoceans.org, and then all of our social medias are at Love the Oceans, and our Instagram is kind of our primary media, so I'd recommend following us on Instagram to check out any like regular updates and things like that and what's going on. But yeah, thanks very much for having me.
It's a very good account to follow. It makes you just want to go to Mozambique.
Thanks.
Yeah, so so if you've enjoyed having a guest on the channel, please let me know, and if you have any recommendations for other guests that I should invite that you want to hear from, please let me know those as well. And you know the drill, like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all the good stuff, and I'll see you next week. So thanks very much, Chess, and
thanks for having me.